The mud is saturated. It's not just wet earth. It's a dense mixture of water, intestines, and smoky gunpowder. The conqueror, Pedro de Valdivia, who promised the crown of Castile the gold of a new empire, now crawls through the mud of Tucapel. He hears the final cry of his men, a sound that will soon be drowned by the beat of Mapuche drums. He knows this is the final hour, the ultimate betrayal. But the vision that tears his soul apart is not that of a barbaric chief. It is the figure standing above him, tall, unyielding, looking down with the cold familiarity of a son. It is Lautaro, the boy he himself had taken under his wing, the stable hand who served him wine, the child who shattered the Spanish Empire. They lied to you in the chronicles. The official history written in Seville narrates a savage massacre, a brutal act of indigenous barbarism against civilization. What they silenced, what they forbade to be told, was that this was the most sophisticated military defeat Spain faced in the New World. It was the revenge long planned during years of servitude. It was the result of epic espionage. To understand the magnitude of this catastrophe, we must go back to the founding of Santiago, to those days when Valdivia's glory seemed untouchable. Valdivia was not just a soldier. He was the archetype of the Renaissance conqueror, ambitious, loyal, and bearing a blind faith in the superiority of his race and his god. And in that camp, amidst the smoke of campfires and the neighing of horses, the young Lautaro grew, renamed by the Spaniards as Felipe, the son of a Mapuche chief, captured at 11 years old, destined for slavery, or worse, to be tamed. Imagine the internal torment. Imagine that boy, forced to polish the chainmail that shone with the blood of his own people. He did not merely observe, he absorbed every order, every maneuver, every weakness. The Spaniards made the fatal mistake of seeing Lautaro as a useful pet, a docile native. They put him in charge of the stables, and that was a strategically invaluable gift. Lautaro learned the rhythm. The horse, the ultimate weapon of conquest, was a mystery to the Mapuche warrior. The thunder of hooves, the speed, the ability to break formations. Valdivia thought he had transformed Lautaro, but Lautaro was completing an advanced course in European military tactics. He learned that the Spaniard was invincible in a frontal charge, but vulnerable to fatigue. He learned that cavalry needed space to maneuver. He learned that the harquebus was slow to reload, and that the standard, that symbol of glory, was also a psychological breaking point. For 6 years, Lautaro served. He served food, served weapons, and slowly simmered betrayal, until he could no longer bear it. The burden of witnessing the massacre of his culture was too heavy. One night, under the brutal and dark mantle of the Andes, Lautaro deserted the Spanish camp. He took no gold or heavy weapons. He took knowledge. When he returned to his village, the Mapuche world was steeped in despair. The tribes were fractured, decimated by disease and steel. But Lautaro did not return as a deserter. He came back as a prophet of modern warfare. He told the chiefs, "They are strong, but they are not gods. Their glory is fragile. I have seen their heart, and I know how to kill them." And training began. He forbade traditional open battle. The people who lived in perfect connection with the land were taught to fight a guerrilla war, to use the terrain not as an obstacle, but as a weapon. The great mystery that still torments historians is the speed with which Lautaro transformed the resistance. How could a people without a tradition of hierarchical military command assimilate European warfare lessons in months? Lautaro implemented the strategy of waves. Instead of confronting the Spaniards with a single army that could be shattered by a cavalry charge, he divided his men into rotating squadrons. Imagine the scene. The first wave attacks, exhausting the Spanish horses, and feigns a retreat. Just when the Spaniards believe they have won, exhausted and out of breath, the second wave emerges, fresh men filled with ferocity. And then a third. This tactic, now studied in military academies, was conceived in the mind of a child who learned by observing horseshoes. When Valdivia marched towards Tucapel, he sought to suppress a small rebellion. But he found not rebels. He found a surgical trap. In the midst of the brutal slaughter at Tucapel, when the last line of Spanish pikemen breaks, Valdivia attempts to flee. He doesn't succeed, and here we return to the mud, to the present moment. Lautaro does not allow his warriors to kill the conqueror immediately. He needs Valdivia to see, to understand, that his own arrogance has given him the tool of his destruction. Revenge is not just the death of the enemy. It is humiliation, the denial of his glory. Lautaro looks at the man who once called him Felipe and shows him that the slave has surpassed the master. Valdivia's fall is not just the loss of a captain, it is the signal. It is the spilled blood that washes the earth, declaring that the Spanish Empire is vulnerable. The Mapuche child who served silently now screams to the world that conquest is not inevitable. And what came next? Lautaro's bloody campaign to expel Spain would forever change the hidden history of the continent. The price of that freedom, however, would be terrifying. Valdivia's death was not the end. It was merely the brutal prologue of a revenge that had been brewing for years. Lautaro, the boy who learned from his masters, had become the ghost now haunting the conquerors. Imagine the terror. The enemy speaks their language, knows their formations, and predicts each of their moves. Lautaro's strategy was not just brute force. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. They lied to you when they said the Mapuche fought without order. Lautaro had seen the effectiveness of European cavalry, so he created his own native cavalry, trained in quick, precise movements. And here is the military trick that would change the hidden history of the conquest. He did not attack just once. Lautaro implemented troop rotation. The first wave, fresh and fierce, hit the Spanish stronghold, forcing them to fight until exhaustion. Then, they retreated, faking a retreat. The Spaniards barely caught their breath, believing they had won a moment of peace. But before they could reorganize, a second and third wave, with warriors rested and thirsty for revenge, entered the field. The Spanish soldier never had a break. It was a brutal and efficient machine of attrition. In a few months, the glory of conquest turned to ashes. Entire forts burned: Arauco, Purin, Tucapel. The blood shed in those fields declared that the myth of European invincibility had died. The echo of defeat traveled throughout the viceroyalty, from Lima to Patagonia. Suddenly, Chile was no longer the promised land, but a common grave. The Spaniards believed they could silence the continent with swords, but now the continent screamed at them with Lautaro's voice. The colonists, who felt invincible, now saw betrayal in every shadow, waiting for the final blow. They knew the fate of the South was sealed. Lautaro had one goal: the ultimate symbol of domination, the capital, Santiago. The march towards the heart of the colonial empire escalated tensions to unbearable levels. But total war demands a price. And the cost was not only measured in Spanish casualties, but also in discipline and loyalty within the Mapuche ranks. Lautaro was a young leader, a brilliant strategist, but not a traditional chief. He had to fight not only against the Spanish tercio, but also against internal politics within his own people. The campaign stretched on. Food became scarce, and the desire to return home tempted many. Where there is pressure, there are cracks. Where there is glory, there is envy. Some chiefs did not trust the boys' tactics. Others, older and more conservative, saw the opportunity to negotiate with the crown, to save their own territories at the cost of unity. Betrayal, that eternal poison in the history of war, began to whisper through the camps. Lautaro's army dispersed and regrouped several times, affected by desertions. For his enemies in Santiago, this was a sign of weakness. But Lautaro was relentless. He implemented a strict discipline. The fate of his nation depended on his will. He knew the moment was now or never. The opportunity to expel Spain would not return. He regrouped his loyal followers, those most committed to the vision of total freedom. If he was to die, he would die standing, trying to liberate his land. As Lautaro advanced, the atmosphere in Santiago was one of absolute panic. The families of the colonists took refuge in the citadel. They dug trenches, reinforced walls, and prayed to a god who seemed to have abandoned them. The Spaniards knew that if Lautaro reached their gates, annihilation would be total and brutal. This was not just a battle for land or gold. It was a battle for the right to exist of two irreconcilable civilizations. A slave who rose to challenge the empire, the young general who knew all their secrets, was about to change the course of the continent forever. And in that decisive moment, Lautaro's story was about to be silenced forever, or to reach eternal glory through blood. But the empire had its own spies, its own networks of information, and where there is a warrior seeking glory, there is always someone willing to barter their life for 30 pieces of silver. The great assault on Santiago would never come as Lautaro had planned. The real danger did not come from the front lines, but from the darkness surrounding him. The stage was set for the final betrayal. On the coldest night, just before dawn, in April 1557, history split in two. The very air was charged with the promise of Lautaro's ultimate revenge, the great assault meant to erase Santiago from the map, the final act of Mapuche justice. But betrayal had already acted. Imagine the weight of the secret, the brutal negotiation taking place behind the leader's back. Someone in the camp, a man who knew the exact position, the number of warriors and the attack plan, had yielded. He had sold the glory of his people for silver or fear. The conqueror Francisco de Villagra, alerted and hungry for redemption, did not wait for the assault on Santiago. He led his cavalry in a silent march, guided by darkness and the precise information of the traitor, right into the heart of Lautaro's camp at Betrayal. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. The warriors slept, confident in the protection of the forest and the certainty of their mission. They awoke to the clamor of Spanish steel, the deafening noise of harquebuses, and the panic. The light had not arrived, but blood had already stained the ground. It was a brutal, surgical blow, designed to annihilate any hope before it could ignite. Lautaro, the man who had learned from Valdivia to then destroy him, reacted with the fury of a cornered lion. He tried to reorganize his men, sort out the flank, but the Spanish cavalry was already there, relentless, unstoppable, hungry for blood. He was not seeking to survive, he was searching for glory, and in the heart of that hell of steel and screams, Lautaro fought with a ferocity that is still difficult to comprehend today. His vengeance had reached the very brink of triumph, but betrayal had caught him first. In the heat of battle, the leader who had challenged imperial power and rewritten war in the New World fell. Spanish records claim it was a gunshot, or perhaps a spear, that brought him down. What matters is not the weapon, but the silence that followed. The icon of resistance, the strategist who had humiliated a superpower, was dead at the age of 23. The Spanish response went beyond the military. It was psychological. To silence the legend, they had to destroy the man. His body was mutilated, his head displayed in the central square of Santiago, a macabre and forbidden message, a bloody warning to anyone who dared to dream of freedom. Lautaro's head became the most feared and coveted trophy of the empire. The message was clear to all who watched. If the boy who brought down the empire could be defeated in this way, then resistance was futile. They lied when they told you this was a mere indigenous uprising. It was a war for cultural and territorial survival, and to end it, the Spaniards had to resort to the lowest act, internal treachery. The city of Santiago breathed a sigh of relief, but it never slept peacefully again. The shadow of Lautaro and his brutal vengeance would continue to haunt every governor and soldier for centuries. Though his body was silenced, the spark of his glory had ignited in the soul of the Mapuche people a flame they could never extinguish. Think about it. If this young leader had not fallen to the dark stab of a traitor, the history of Chile and all of South America would have been radically different. The empire, for a moment, stood on the brink of the abyss, saved not by its military power, but by human weakness. Today, the figure of Lautaro remains buried beneath layers of official history mixed with myths and legends. But his truth is tangible. It is in the land we walk on. It is in the air breathed by the city he almost conquered. This is the story of how vengeance met betrayal. It is the silenced legacy that needs to be unearthed. If you believe that the truth, no matter how bloody, deserves to be remembered, if you believe that the glory of the fallen cannot be forever forbidden by the victors, share this tale. Let the story of Lautaro, the boy who brought the empire to its knees, resonate louder than the silence of his killers.